Before my family and I moved to another state, my father went and visited the area to check on the progress of our new house which was being built. My father was there for a few days and was staying at some crappy Motel 6 in a shady area of town. His room was the last room at the end of the hallway on the top floor. In the middle of the night, on the last night he was in town, he was awoken by the phone ringing in his room. He groggily wakes up and answers the phone. It was the front desk, and they say something along the lines of, "Sorry to wake you, but we've been receiving a couple of reports about rooms being broken into and some stuff being stolen. We are calling to make sure that your door is locked and that you are safe." My father replies that he is fine and hangs up the phone. He decides to go double check that he did lock his door. As he sits up in bed, he notices that the door to his room is ajar. Being spooked, he cautiously checks the room and finds that nothing is missing and no one else is in the room. He creeps to the door and peeks out. Sitting right outside his room, on the windowsill of the hallway window, is his shaving kit. Creeped out of his mind, he quickly grabs it and locks the door. After he calms down a bit, he calls down to the front desk and says, "Hey, you just called me about the break-ins around the hotel, and I just wanted to report that my room was broken into when I was sleeping. Nothing's stolen, and I'm fine. Figured you would like to know." The front desk replied, "You must be mistaken. We never called your room, and we haven't received any reports of break-ins." I hike a lot in remote areas. I was hiking in Pennsylvania, miles from anything. Not even on a trail, just bushwhacking through the woods, when I come up on this guy about 200 feet away, sitting on this log. Just sitting there, wearing jeans and a hoodie over his head, staring at me. I wave, but he doesn't wave back. I start walking over, and wave again, and yell something like, "Wow, I wasn't expecting to see anyone else out here." No response. I was getting a little nervous, but I had already committed, so I kept approaching the man. Then, I started noticing rock piles and circles, and things hanging in the trees. I get about 10 feet from him, and this freaking pheasant takes off, scaring the crap out of me. That's when I notice it's a mannequin, sitting there dressed up, surrounded by strange rock piles and things hanging in the trees, miles from anything. I hightailed it out of there, thinking maybe I had come upon something I was not supposed to see. Back in 2003, while stationed in Portsmouth, Virginia, I was going through a divorce and as such had moved back into the barracks. Reeling from the stress of the divorce, I had trouble sleeping and would go for a run at all hours. One such morning around 4 a.m., I took off for a quick 5-mile run. Portsmouth has some pretty dodgy areas, and my run took me straight through one of them. As I got to the top of a bridge, I saw someone standing on the side of the road. It was odd, but not completely unheard of, that I would see a non-runner standing somewhere other than a bus stop. Anyhow, he watched me the entire time I ran closer to him, and as I got closer, he turned his back to me, but continued to watch me over his shoulder. Since I tend to become more friendly in awkward situations, I said hi as I ran past him, but I picked up my pace. After a couple minutes, I had pretty much forgotten about the encounter. As I continued my run, there was a bridge that went over an interstate. After I crossed the bridge, I about had a heart attack as I saw the same guy standing on the side of the road again. No cars passed me, and there was no way he could have gotten from where we first met to here in that amount of time without driving past me. Again, Being nervous, all I could say was, "Man, you're fast." I'm pretty sure I broke a personal speed record after that. I was fishing with my uncle, and we were in a small aluminum boat just sort of floating down a river, looking for a good place to drop anchor and start fishing. We went around a bend in the river and saw the scene of a small plane crash on a steep slope on one side of a hill leading down to the river. The plane was on its nose and kinda crumpled. There were probably 5 people standing around. 2 of them were in suits. There was a blue tarp on the ground with a white sheet over it. I assumed that was a body. That wasn't really the creepy part though. Next to the body, not covered in a white sheet, was what appeared to be a collection of body parts. They weren't even recognizable as human, except that one of them had a shoe on it. It was eerie, because for the past 2 hours, we had been floating in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but the sound of the river, and then out of nowhere, we come around a turn, with just a total scene of horror. I've seen fatal car crashes that weren't nearly as creepy. This was back when I was a little kid in Eastern Europe. My cousin and I were walking through the woods. We were maybe 8 or 9 years old. It was more like a large urban forest, big enough to get lost in. Suddenly, we saw a man standing in the bushes. He was wearing nothing but tighty-whities, dress shoes, and a watch, and had his back toward us. We kind of just froze standing there, staring at him. He must have heard the rustling behind him and slowly turned around. He had the creepiest smile on his face and started slowly moving towards us while making a beckoning motion with his finger. I remember being frozen with fear for a few moments before turning around to look at my cousin, who was no longer there. I could only see his heels flashing in the distance as he was running away. Of course, I followed immediately, and I don't think I've ever ran that fast before or since. I went to my aunt and uncle's house one family vacation about 10 years ago. We drove from South Texas to some small town in Missouri. I can't remember the name. We arrived there about 1 a.m. Family consisted of myself, 2 younger sisters, my mother, and my father. Most of the family was hungry from the long drive and wanted to see if a McDonald's was open. I was tired from the long car ride and wanted to stay at the house. Mom said one of my sisters would be staying as well. I settled down into the living room watching TV, slightly dozing off. I can remember that I started hearing pitter-patter down the hallway and assumed my sister was just running around. I get a call from my mom asking what I wanted to eat, and in the background I can hear both of my sisters arguing. I hear a giggle behind me. I stand straight up and look around. Nothing. I asked my mom if my sister ended up going with them, which she confirmed. I stood in the corner of the room until everyone got back. This happened recently. It was midnight. I was at the train station waiting for my train to arrive, and there was this really tall guy walking in my direction, carrying a suitcase. As he came closer, I noticed he was struggling to carry the suitcase, as it looked rather heavy, and oddly enough, it was leaking some sort of liquid. Not water, but it seemed thicker, darker. As this guy approached me, he ordered me to take his suitcase. The tone of his voice was a little aggressive, and he didn't sound sober. Taking a closer look at him, I noticed he was covered in dirt up to his face and had cuts on his forearms. I said sorry and started to walk away. My train starts to arrive, and the guy follows me saying things I couldn't quite understand. I hop on the train, and the door shuts. I turn around and look, and he is outside pointing at me, yelling gibberish. The train slowly starts to depart, and suddenly he punches the window in frustration, with his eyes locked on me. I was very relieved that I was on the train, and fellow commuters looked at me puzzled with all the commotion of me and that weird guy. It really creeped me out. I've always wondered what was inside that suitcase, and I'm sure your imagination will come up with the same thing that mine did. When I was about 10, I was having a sleepover at my friend Amy's house. I was sleeping on the mattress on the floor, and it was positioned as if you sat up, you looked directly down the hall into the living room. Amy's mom's bedroom was to the left, and the bathroom was on the right. I still remember this very clearly. Amy was a bit of a scaredy cat. Everything scared her. I remember the dogs barking next door woke us up. She was scared and tried to get into bed with me. I was like, it's just dogs. Go back to bed. She was scared and went to sleep with her mom. It was summertime, so it got light pretty early. I woke up and saw Amy's aunt sitting on the couch staring at me. Amy's aunt was in the Air Force and would visit when she was on leave. I remember thinking, why is she staring at me? She looked away, and I just lay there looking at her. It was around 5:15 a.m. I eventually fell back to sleep and woke at a more reasonable hour and asked Amy where her aunt was. She looked at me puzzled and told me that she wasn't there, that she was far away in a different city. I swear it was not a dream, and there was some lady that was sitting there. I was on a cross-country drive by myself heading out west, and because I was solo, I didn't want to waste money and time on a motel when I could just grab some sleep in my car. At around 11 or 12 at night, I arrive at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere. I think it was somewhere in Louisiana. The nearest exits were about 20 miles apart from each other, and all of the towns around me had a population of about 300 people max. As I was laying in my car at a rest stop sleeping, I don't know what caused me to wake up, but I opened my eyes and saw a man in front of the driver's side window staring into my car. There were no other cars around, except for like one big rig. I don't know what he was doing there at 3 a.m., but it scared the hell out of me because it was literally just the highway and nothing else nearby. Nothing. The guy tried to open my door, and I just sat there in fear. He eventually left, and I don't think he noticed that I was awake. But after he walked away, I turned on my car and continued driving. It's crazy thinking how things would have gone if I had forgot to lock my door. A few weeks ago, my girlfriend and I were sleeping together when I woke up to her saying, "What are you doing?" She sometimes talked in her sleep, but this sounded so coherent and urgent that it jolted me awake, and I asked what she was talking about. She then woke up and said she thought she saw someone at the end of the bed. Thinking it was just a dream or a semi-awake hallucination, we thought nothing of it and went back to sleep. About an hour later, I woke up and saw someone standing at the edge of the bed with the sheets wrapped up and twisted around their neck. I didn't know what to do, but the first thing that came out of my mouth was, "What are you doing?" My girlfriend then woke me up. I had been dreaming and had the exact same dream that she did and said the exact same thing. When I was growing up, one of my best friends told me about a very creepy situation involving him, his younger brother, and a man in the window. When my friend and his little brother were younger, they shared a bedroom. They are some years apart, but his younger brother was born with a multitude of different health issues, including multiple sclerosis, and he's confined to a wheelchair and cannot care for himself. To keep an eye on him overnight when his parents couldn't, they shared a bedroom. One night, my friend randomly woke up for no particular reason and happened to glance over at his younger brother, but noticed something very startling. A strange silhouette of a man wearing a top hat was looking in through the window behind his younger brother's bed. The first thing my friend did was jump up and turn the light on, and then ran into his parents' room to tell them what he saw. When his parents came back into their room to investigate, his younger brother was having a seizure in his bed. A few of his family members say it was his younger brother's guardian angel standing in the window that night. My friend believes it was death. It's all pretty unsettling to me. A few years ago, I went to a Christmas party. That night, my housemates went home earlier, while I decided to stay and get in the Christmas spirit with a few other friends. I ended up getting pretty hammered and got home around 3 a.m. Instead of going straight to bed, I got another beer inside and then went out the back porch to have a smoke and look at the stars. I was outside a couple of minutes when I see the light go on in the kitchen. My housemate looks out the window and sees me out back. I wave and generally look like a drunk idiot. He just gets a glass of water and goes to bed. I finish my smoke and my beer, and I do the same thing. The next morning we're rehashing the previous night when he mentions getting up and seeing me having a smoke in the backyard. Who came back from the party with you last night? I give him a weird look and reply, no one. I was out there alone. He insists, nah man, there was someone out there with you, behind you on the porch, when you were looking inside waving. To this day, he stands by that this is what really happened. Whoever it was standing right behind me the whole time. I saw no one and heard nothing. It gives me the chills every time I think about it. Back in high school, probably junior year, I was in a long-distance relationship with a girl from several states away. She would visit a few times a year, and when she did, we obviously spent as much time together as possible. One night, we were kind of making up from a fight we had had, and we drove up in my dad's truck to basically the lover's lane of the area, a dirt cul-de-sac at the end of a road on the mountainside. From this little lot, you could look out over the town at night, and it was pretty cool, which is why it was kind of a popular place to go. So we're parked in the truck just off the road, looking out over the town and cuddling while we talk out our issue. Like many trucks, it had a small hatch window on the back of the cab, facing the bed of the truck. We opened this window to let some fresh air in. At some point during our talk, another vehicle pulled up along the cul-de-sac. Since I didn't make it clear before, the cul-de-sac didn't really have a curb all the way around it, because it was partially dirt, so you could pull off the actual road and out onto the flat area overlooking the town. We had pulled off the road like that, but the other vehicles stayed in the area with the curb, so we would have to go right past them to get back onto the road. This vehicle pulls up, and a bunch of guys a little older than us get out and start messing around. It seemed like they probably were doing some drinking, but maybe not. The thing is, they had left their headlights on, and their car was facing into the back of the truck, so their lights were shining right on us, and it was really annoying. We ignore them for a while, figuring they're probably just being idiots, and will eventually leave. Then, We get curious about what they're talking about because we can hear them talking loudly through the open back window, and we start listening in and picking up pieces of their conversation. It gradually became clear that we were the center of their attention, and they seemed to be working themselves up to doing something. I don't remember exactly what they were saying, except for something that one of them said that sticks very clear in my memory. "I swear, I'll do it." At this point, I am becoming nervous and put the keys in the ignition, telling my girlfriend that I wasn't interested in finding out what exactly was going on. So now, we're both watching nervously out the back window as we listen to them egging each other on to this mysterious dare when a few of them start walking toward the truck. They're maybe 15 yards away, and I don't want to make an idiot of myself in front of my girlfriend by immediately flipping out, but I do turn on the truck and put it in reverse, but not moving yet. When they saw the brake lights, they started walking faster, and that's when I hit the gas and turned the truck around and started driving back to the road. But like I said, their car was between where we were and the road, so driving back to the road takes us right past them. As we're passing their group, a couple of them run at the truck, and one of them jumps onto the back bumper, grabbing the tailgate. Now, whatever traces of doubt that had been there about whether or not we were the target of something was gone. So I floored it, and the guy fell off. I don't know if he got hurt. I don't care. It looked like they were starting to get into their car as well, so I booked it out of the area, and we didn't see them again, nor did we ever return to that place. I still have no idea what would have happened if we hadn't gotten out of there, and that, to me, is the scary part. I'd like to think that they were just trying to scare us and wouldn't have actually done anything, but at the same time, I've heard stories of people at places like that getting raped or killed. It's entirely possible that we both came very close to something horrible that night, and the experience scares me to this day. When I was 6 years old, we lived in the center of a set of 3 very similar houses. I remember ours was purple, the one to the left was blue, and the one to the right was yellow. I recently had bought one of those big inflatable bouncy balls from Walmart and had no one to play with me, so I played with it in the backyard by myself. After school one day, I accidentally hit the ball over the fence to the yellow house on the side. I was going to ask my mom what to do, but a kid on the other side hit it back over for me. Thinking that we could play, I hit it back over, and he returned it again. It became a daily thing, and I would just hit the ball back and forth with him until I got bored after school. The kid wouldn't respond to any questions or anything I said, so I assumed he was just really shy. One day I hit it over the fence, and he didn't return it. So I asked my mom if I could climb the fence and go get it. She was never outside with me, so she always thought I was playing alone. We only got the house because my mom was friends with the landlord and the houses were recently built. She told me that no one had ever lived there. They were trying to sell the place. We moved out not long after, but I still have no idea who was returning that ball to me. When I was 11, I was at the beach. I realized a sketchy guy was sort of following me around. Everywhere I went, he was about 20 feet away, just kind of glaring at me. He was probably in his mid-30s, your average bearded creeper from the early 90s. I realized something was wrong when I got separated from my friend that I was with and jumped into a little tide pool that had a wave effect going. The guy jumped in on the other end, and I was getting dragged towards him. I can still remember the guy's slow, deliberate frog stroke as he got closer and closer. I had a huge surge of adrenaline and managed to claw my way out of the water. I took off running, screaming for my friend. It was a pretty busy day at the beach, and I imagine a grown man sprinting after a kid would have raised eyebrows. I stuck like glue to my parents until we left. That guy probably would have made furniture out of my skin. Cody, Wyoming, midnight. I had just finished a very long day at work. I am a medical courier, and I am regularly on the road, staying in hotels, and life is never dull. This particular evening, I wound up on a 500-mile drive that ended in Cody, Wyoming, at around midnight. It had been cold. It was December after all, and this is Wyoming. The roads had been very so-so that night. They weren't clear, but they weren't treacherous. It was one of those drives in the dark where you are on edge the whole time, staying alert for 500 miles in the dark on roads that were nearly abandoned. At this time of night, with light snow and heavy winds, it takes a lot out of a person. This particular week, it had been very busy. I had been in 4 states that week by the time I reached Wyoming that evening. The drive to the patient's house was up on a windy, slick road, and the drive was uneventful. After I had dropped the medicine off to them, I called the boss to let them know I had made it and was heading to a hotel to get some sleep. Pretty usual conversation. We talked briefly about how much they would reimburse me for the hotel room. They always say $80 to $100. It's pretty typical and fair, since the cheap hotel in Cody, Wyoming is about that price. I, however, am 31, and a good night's rest, a good free breakfast, and a nice AM soak in a hot tub are requirements for when I catch myself in a hotel room. I know that by the time I get to the hotel, I have put on serious miles, so I treat myself. 1, because if I am staying in a hotel, it has been a profitable day, and I can afford to treat myself just a little. And 2, I feel better after a good night's rest, a great breakfast, and a nice soak. I will not name the chain of hotels I stay at, but I frequent one chain because it's the best value hotel in my hometown, which is back in Nebraska. Tonight, I pulled into the hotel, which I have stayed at 3 or 4 times now, so I am familiar with the place. I had called ahead about 8 hours before when I was leaving Denver to call and book a room and let them know they would be expecting me at midnight. I walk into the hotel with my bag, dusting off the snow that had fallen on me while I got my stuff out of the car and walked inside. It's very quiet. There's no music, and the TV isn't on in the lobby. I wander to the counter, leaving a trail of wet shoe prints behind from coming in out of the snow into the lobby, my shoes squeaking as I approach the counter. When I get to the counter, there is no one there. On the counter is a bowl of ice cream with a brownie from the restaurant connected to the hotel. The local paper is open to the comics page, and the Sudoku is half filled out with a pen sitting there. Hanging on the back of the chair is a small lady's coat with fake fur fringe around the hood. On the floor next to the chair are a pair of smaller pink and black Nikes and a black purse. I figure that she, by the assumption of the coat, shoes, and purse, is in the bathroom, so I stand at the counter quietly, waiting on her to return. I fiddle with my wallet, getting out my card to pay for it, and my ID. I scroll through on my phone and hook up to their free Wi-Fi. 5 minutes go by, and then 10. At 15 minutes the phone starts ringing. I still had no idea where she was, and I had begun to get irritated. It had been a long day, and I wanted to get rested before I got up and drove home in the morning. After the phone stopped ringing, and I started to get frustrated, I began to wander around the lobby and behind the counter shouting, "Hello, is anyone here?" as loudly as possible. The area behind the counter is an employee-only area. I venture back behind the counter, where a hallway leads to the back-of-house area connected to the offices, staff elevator, bathrooms, laundry, and the restaurant. I venture down the hallway shouting, "Hello!" Still no one answers. It is now 12:30 a.m. As I return to the counter and begin looking for a posted phone number for a manager or someone of authority, the phone rings. The cordless phone still laying next to the paper she had opened. Frustrated and exhausted, I answer the phone, hoping it's someone who could tell me where the woman is who is supposed to check me in. It's not. It's another guest who had tried calling earlier for a wake-up call in the morning. I explain to the gentleman on the phone my situation and how I cannot help him. He states he is coming to the lobby to help me look for the girl at the counter. I had not found a number to call. 5 minutes go by and the strange older man with odd glasses and long, unkempt hair comes into the lobby from the first floor hallway. At this point, I had been behind the counter and had been shouting to the point I feared I may wake up other guests. I had wandered through the back area, the lobby, and the front part of the restaurant, all while shouting, and no one responded. This guy had given me the creeps, and I was exhausted but on high alert. There was an employee missing, and a creepy guy who just happened to appear in the same time she is missing. Feeling nervous about this gentleman, I stay prepared for any strange behavior and keep myself at least arm's distance from him the entire time. I explain where I have looked, that I have yelled. At this point, I begin to go through what I call worst case scenario preparation. This guy could have easily overpowered a small woman. I may be standing here with a crazy person. I keep my space and my back towards the main entry just in case. I am a grown man, just under 6 feet. I have had self-defense courses, and I have a concealed carry weapon after encountering a bear at a patient's house in the fall. I have no reason to believe I am in immediate trouble, but this guy gives me the creeps. It is at this point I debate calling the cops. It's now 12:45 a.m. The gentleman tells me maybe she's in the bathroom, which I respond to that I had thought that myself, but I had walked by and yelled loudly when I walked through the back and no one responded. He insists that we check the bathrooms. My red flag goes off and I put another foot or two of space between us as I let him lead us down the hallway to the employee bathroom. My heart and mind are racing at this point. Did this guy kill her? And now he's gonna try to kill me? I start to worry about my safety as we go down a hallway that leads to small rooms and with one exit in and out. We reach the bathroom. He knocks and announces himself and then opens the door. The bathroom is empty. We check a few more rooms and the elevator, but we find nothing. We venture back to the lobby where I stand behind the counter looking for any phone number that could be a manager or supervisor. After about 10 minutes, I find a number and someone answers. It's now 12:55 a.m. The half-asleep voice on the other end of the phone is the maintenance woman for the hotel. Confused as to who I am and why I'm calling, I explain the situation as the creepy man stands on the other side of the counter, staring at me in a dead cold manner. The maintenance woman says she will be there in 10 minutes or so. I hang up the phone. I walk around the counter still confused, looking at her stuff there, as if she just vanished. It's at this point I decide to wander towards the lobby and the seating area for the restaurant. Once in the doorway, I turn the corner, and down at the end of the booths, there are a pair of legs hanging out of the booth. I had walked within 15 feet of there while checking around before the creepy guy showed up. I see her legs hanging, and instantly the pit of my stomach turns sour, and a sense of dread comes over me. Suddenly the creepy guy walks right up by me. Thinking the worst, I take a few quick steps away from him and down the row of booths in the dark restaurant. With him at the other end, I look in the booth where she is laying. She is maybe 20 years old and very pretty. I shake her foot. She doesn't respond. I shake again. saying, "Hey!" Nothing. It's at this moment the creepy guy starts to walk down to the booth that I finally feel I may need to defend myself. I kneel down to draw my ankle holster as he quickly comes down the row of booths, and it's at this exact moment the girl wakes up and accidentally kicks me in the chest, knocking me gently on my ass and stopping Mr. Creepy in his tracks, also stopping me from drawing a weapon. She had been asleep. Mr. Creepy was just a guest. Moments later, the maintenance woman arrived, and by 1:15 a.m., I was in my room, trying to decompress. When I was 19, I was driving back from my girlfriend's house at around 1 in the morning. I see this SUV parked at a closed gas station with a woman screaming for help. And I mean screaming, like the most terrifying scream I've ever heard. So I pull over to see what she needs. Then I see this huge guy laying on the ground behind the SUV, his head surrounded in a pool of blood. Now I'm thoroughly freaked out. The woman looks Spanish, and all she keeps saying is help, over and over again, so I call 911 and give them the intersection the gas station is at. There is nothing around for miles, just forest in every direction. While I'm talking with the 911 operator, the woman stops screaming and gets into the passenger seat of the SUV. The man on the ground sits up, stands up, and then gets into the driver's seat. I'm still on the phone with 911 when I see the woman pull out her own phone and start casually speaking in Spanish. It is at this point I realize there is another huge guy sitting in the back seat. I have no idea what to think, but I know I need to get out of there. Then they just slowly pull away like nothing happened. It's a good thing I never got out of my car, or things could have been a lot worse. I still don't know what they were doing, but I'm glad I didn't find out. A few months ago, I had a random encounter with a crazy lady outside my apartment. It was around 3 a.m., and I had went downstairs for a smoke. I noticed that there's a woman standing out in the middle of the street, and it's pouring rain. So I ask if she's okay. She just ignores me, so I went back to browsing through my phone. As I start walking back to the entrance, I have to turn a corner, and as soon as I do, the woman is standing right there, right in front of me. Now, I'm not a small guy, but this 5-foot, 60-something-year-old Asian lady was terrifying. I've come across wolves and wild boars in the wild, had a knife pointed at me, even had a gun pulled on me, but oh my God, she has haunted my dreams since this happened. She was bawling, but also somehow looked furious. She starts screaming at me in a deeper voice than expected, saying that I knew she had been there, and that I knew her true name. I promptly walk past her and ignore her. She starts laughing hysterically as I walk to my door, and says her name is Soul Eater. I still have dreams about her every now and then. It scared the hell out of me. This happened when I was living in Indonesia. To set the scene, we had a house for a while that was a bit like a wedding cake. On top was a little nook room, a bit like a ship's crow's nest. You could see for ages. We were in the middle of an empty square patch of land, and it backed onto an unused field. Big, flat, open, nowhere to hide. No trees lining it, just more flat fields and then a tall back wall. A wall of about 4 foot high separated the field and my house. One day, late afternoon, I'm up there just relaxing, and I hear these blood-curdling screams. I look out the window. A woman. From my window, I can see her running across the field at the back, kind of limping. Pretty sure she was covered in blood. She was about halfway through the field when I saw her. I run down to the ground floor and towards the field, and she's gone. No sign of her at all. It took me all of about a minute, if that. I was booking it down there to get to the field, but she had just vanished. Nowhere to be seen. It is incredibly unlikely someone came into the field, grabbed her, and pulled her back out without me having seen them. Pretty much impossible, really. I sent my house security out to look for her. I stayed in the field looking, and they went towards where she came from, and over the wall she had to have come over to get into the field. It was an unused holiday villa, and they found a sandal and a bit of blood. Nothing else. There was blood on the wall where she climbed over, but nothing on the other side. So I know I didn't imagine it. We called the police, and they came and had a look, and they found nothing. I really wish I knew what happened when I was coming down those stairs, but I know it can't have been good. It still really freaks me out. I was at home during the week, and it was just me and my kid. He was 2 at the time. Somebody knocked at the door, and so I went to answer it. At the door were 2 kids. One was a girl, around 5 years old, and the other was a boy that looked to be around 9. I know the faces of pretty much every kid in the area, but I didn't recognize these 2. The girl asked me if I could help them because they were lost. Obviously, I tried to help them. They were about to walk in, but stopped when my son walked out of the living room. The youngest one said, "Never mind, ma'am. We have to go." And they both just ran off. I turned around, picked up my son, and gave chase, but I couldn't find them anywhere. They vanished. It's weird because I live right in the middle of my street. So I'm pretty sure 2 small kids couldn't have gotten out of sight that quickly. I have no idea what it was all about or what the hell happened to them.
To the best of my memory, it was the late 80s, on a hot and sunny day in Toronto, Canada. I was about 12 years old. My friends and I were playing baseball at our public school baseball diamond, which was on a relatively busy street. Just for reference, this school has since been demolished, and a new school building was built right over the said baseball diamond. New building, same name. Also, interesting fact, the old school building also happens to be the location where country singer Michelle Wright did her music video for All I Really Wanna Do in 1991. Now back to the story. A man in his 40s showed up and sat on the bench right beside the baseball diamond. Under the hot sun, no hat, nor any other kind of shade. We thought this was a little odd, but we just kept playing. He was watching us, and shouted some comments pertaining to baseball here and there. I suppose he was bored, and had nothing better to do. Let's call him Man Number 1. The baseball diamond was right beside a busy street, which has its share of poor people, middle-class people, drug addicts, drug dealers, prostitutes, and other weirdos. So, needless to say, we were pretty used to this. However, as the man kept shouting his uninvited baseball comments, he began to irritate me at this point, so I qualified him as creepy. To my relief, he eventually walked away. Soon it was my turn to pitch. Just then, another man showed up, also in his 40s. Let's call him Man Number 2. Man Number 2 also had some comments on the baseball game, but was more aggressive in his baseball advice. Eventually, he came closer and closer until he stepped up to me and started giving me pitching advice. I thought it was strange that he had to give me advice for underhand pitching, but as a naive young boy, I had the habit of respecting and obeying adults by default. Then he started getting right up against my back and started holding my wrist to show me how to pitch. You know how you see in movies how guys put moves on girls under the guise of teaching them something, like throwing a ball or swinging a golf club? Yeah, he was doing that. And now that I think back on it, he was right up against my body, so it was quite inappropriate to say the least. Well, at this point, I was very uncomfortable, and what made it worse was that I could smell alcohol on him. He was touching me inappropriately in front of all my friends, in the broad daylight, and I didn't know what to do. I don't know what my friends were thinking, but I remember it being very quiet. I suppose they were in a bit of shock, not as much as I was, though. I think it's this thing that kids have to please people, especially adults. It reminds me of that movie, The Lovely Bones, where the predator uses kids' respect for adults against them, manipulating them, as he states several times, be polite. So, when I finally overcame my initial shock, I backed away. Just then, I heard man number 1 shouting some obscenities to man number 2. Man number 1 had returned. He came at him and started shoving him. Man number 2 started to back away, cursing back. Man number 1, still scolding and cursing at him, did some sort of jump kick to his back and sent him stumbling forward. This continued as they moved right out of the schoolyard. We watched them for a few minutes until man number 2 disappeared. Man number 1 returned, looking angry, and shouted a few things to us. But to be honest, I was still in shock and didn't understand what he said. He finally just walked away, for good this time. Even though I was a little scrapper kid, for years thinking back on it, I felt foolish, violated, and ashamed for letting someone put his hands on me like that. However, I'll always be grateful to that stranger man, man number 1, who had nothing better to do that day than to sit in the sun, shouting uninvited baseball comments, and then beat up and chase away a sexual predator that preyed on a child. Whomever you are, I thank you. And to everyone else, please let the kids know that they aren't obligated to please or be polite to anyone that makes them feel uncomfortable in any way. They don't owe them anything. Encourage them to be strong and to stand up for themselves. Let me start by saying that I was really only looking to hook up. I had just been dumped by my boyfriend and am not the bar type, so I figured that an online dating service would be a reasonable option. I used a local personal service and had been talking to a guy for about 2 days before agreeing to meet him. His name was Mike, and he had told me that he used online dating because he was suffering from depression and was on medication that made it hard for him to perform. He decided that it was easier to meet girls this way than to meet up in person and then have to explain when they started getting physical. He went on to tell me, though, that he had a good feeling about me and that I was exciting to him despite his medication. Okay. I was cool with this, and decided to go over to his place to see if we really did have chemistry, since we both seemed to be looking for the same thing, a hookup. When I got there, he was waiting for me in the living room, and we started making out. I could tell that he was getting a little aroused, but was having some issues, and so when he said that he knew what would help, and that it was in his bedroom, I willingly followed. Walking in, I couldn't help but notice his bed, surrounded by cat condos. Lots of cat condos. Some structured to be as tall as I was. I knew he had cats, but I assumed he meant one or two, and that they were just hiding when I came over. Nope. He had 10, which all came out from under the bed when we sat on it, and all went to their perches on the cat condos to watch us, after rubbing against him and being petted quickly. He then proceeded to start making out with me again, and was, well, massively aroused at this point. I was massively creeped out. I like cats. I have two myself, but having them watch me pee freaks me out, much less watching me have sex. I excused myself, openly admitting that this was too weird for me, and left. He followed me and begged me to give him another chance, and help him. I left. For the next few days, he messaged me, asking me to come over and saying that he had made progress with me. I blocked him after receiving a photo of him nude on the bed, surrounded by the cats. I was driving through the California desert on my way to New Mexico. Taking a shortcut, I found myself all alone on a 2-lane road driving through the desolate landscape. There was nothing for miles, except for an abandoned ghost town. At the time, I had heard rumors that the area was a hotspot for satanic group activity. It was late in the evening, and the sun was setting. Soon it would be dark. I was driving through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead, I noticed something in the middle of the road, blocking my path. As I came closer, I slowed down to a crawl. There was a truck stopped sideways across both lanes. On the road, there was an open suitcase, and clothes were scattered everywhere. 2 bodies lay face down in the road. It was a man and a woman, and they appeared to be dead. I stopped 100 feet or so from the scene of the accident. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up. Something was very wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. I reached into the back seat and pulled out my rifle, putting a round into the chamber. Then it hit me. The scene of the accident looked too perfect. It was as if it had been staged. Was it some sort of ambush, or was I just being paranoid? I broke out into a cold sweat. My heart was pounding in my chest. Something was seriously wrong. I didn't dare to get out of the car. As I scanned the road, I saw a line I could drive. I could pass the body of the man lying in the road on the left, then swerve to the right side, and pass the body of the woman. I dropped into first gear, punched the engine, and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the truck without hitting it, or either of the bodies in the road. I continued forward for a few hundred feet, and then slowed down so I could breathe and let my heart slow down. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I suddenly realized that the 2 bodies had gotten up to their knees, and at least 20 shadowy figures were emerging from the tall grass on either side of the road. At that moment, I began to panic. My right foot stepped on the gas, and I sped off down the road. I didn't let up until I had to slow down, and I reached the highway. I will never know what would have happened to me had I gotten out of the car to check on the bodies, or if I had stopped my car closer to them. Somehow, I don't think it would have been good. Sometimes, real life can be scarier than any horror movie. I lived in a weird house as a kid, which resulted in chairs being moved in other rooms when I was the only one home, kitchen cupboards opening late at night when no one else was awake. I could be sitting at the computer in a lit room at night and watch as a black cloud would float through a closed door and sit, suspended in the air, across the room from me. I had footsteps that would walk outside my door and loud breathing. I was so terrified as a child that I ended up sleeping with music playing so I could tune out the noises. I still, to this day, cannot sleep without music playing. I probably could have convinced myself that most of it wasn't real as I aged, if it wasn't for a certain weird happening. It was about 11 a.m. in the morning, and my younger brother and I were waiting at home while my mother was out doing jobs. We were waiting for her to come back to pick us up, so we were sitting by the front window watching for her car, and then we heard the radio playing from my brother's room. We both didn't understand why it was on all of a sudden, so we walked to my brother's room. My brother hid behind me, and I had to walk in the room first, and the second I crossed the threshold, the radio went silent. Upon closer inspection, we realized it wasn't even plugged in, and there were no batteries in the back of it. There was no logical explanation for it to be playing, and my brother, a young boy, had a bunch of Matchbox cars and an old car playmat, and he swore and declared that he had parked the cars neatly on it, in lines. But when we went in there, the cars were thrown all over the room. Luckily, we moved out of that house, but my brother and I still remember the radio saga clearly to this day, and it's pretty much the only reason I know I wasn't completely crazy as a child. This happened a few months ago, when I was in my second year of junior high school. Hanging on the wall, at the back of our classroom, there was a suggestion box. It was put there by the teacher, Mrs. Solomon. If any students had ideas for improvements that could be made, we were supposed to write our opinions down in a letter and put it in the suggestion box. Then, Mrs. Solomon would read the letters and consider our proposals. One morning, when we came to class, someone had crossed out the suggestion part of the sign and written death there instead. The death box caused a bit of a stir in the classroom. Some students thought it was funny, but others were a little disturbed by it. There were rumors that two boys named Derek and Jamal did it as a prank. They were always causing mischief and disrupting class. However, when the teacher confronted them about it, both of them denied it. Afterwards, I quietly asked them if they really had done it. They still claim they knew nothing about it. In the end, the teacher couldn't figure out who the culprit was, and the matter was dropped. A few days later, Derek was found hanging by the neck in the classroom after school. He was dead. There was a note in the death box that read, "Sorry for annoying everyone in the class." A few days after Derek's funeral, Jamal was also found hanging by the neck in the classroom. In the death box there was another note that read, "Sorry for annoying everyone in the class." We were all shocked. None of us could understand why two of our classmates would suddenly commit suicide. It was very disturbing. After that, when we came to school, the classroom seemed very creepy. All we could think about was what had occurred there. Soon after that, I transferred to a new school. I had to get used to the new classroom and trying to make a new group of friends. One day, when I got home after school and turned on the TV, I saw a breaking news report. It was about my previous school. Scrolling across the bottom of the screen, I saw the headline, "Teacher Suicide." The news anchor was saying, the teacher who committed suicide was the homeroom teacher of the 2 boys who were killed. She left behind a suicide note that read, "I always wanted to know what it would feel like to kill. Sorry for all the fuss." I stared at the screen in disbelief. According to the news report, Derek and Jamal had not committed suicide after all. They were murdered by our teacher, Mrs. Solomon, and then she committed suicide. It was all too much to take in, and very hard to believe. Sure, sometimes Mrs. Solomon would scold the students for misbehaving, but she was usually a kind and gentle woman. Why would she do all of this? I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I had misbehaved just as much as Derek or Jamal. If I had not been transferred to a different school, perhaps I would have been next. Just then, I heard the sound of the front door opening. My mother was home from work. She came into my room carrying an envelope in her hand. "There was a letter for you," she said. "Why are you so pale? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't answer her. Instead, I took the letter and examined it. The envelope was blank. There was no address written on it. I opened it and found a note inside, written in big red letters. It read, "Don't think you can escape." 15 days have passed since then, but I'm still too afraid to set foot outside my front door. I have had 3 encounters with Zozo. The first time I ever played with a Ouija board, I had not heard about Zozo, and I wanted to prove that Ouija boards were fake. So I said, "Are there any spirits willing to communicate?" And the planchette moved to yes. So I then asked for its name, and it spelt Zozo. So I said goodbye. A year later, I told my friends about it, and they said they wanted to do it, so we all did. Once we started the session, I asked the same question, "Are there any spirits willing to communicate?" Again, the planchette moved to yes. So I then asked, "Are you from the sun or the moon?" And the planchette went to moon. We then asked, "What's your name?" And it spelt out, Zozo. I was going to say goodbye, but then my friends asked, "Are you going to hurt us?" And Zozo said, "Yes." We all decided then to say goodbye. We decided to try it again the next day, and the same thing happened, except that time we said goodbye before going too far. Ever since beginning these sessions, some weird things have occurred in my house, but I still continue to play with the Ouija board. I used to live in a house that backs up to a big public open space where there are hiking trails. Lots of joggers and people walking their dogs. Anyway, one night, I had a kind of creepy dream that an old lady came into my room and was trying to get me to come outside. The dream woke me up, so I got some water and turned off my fan because it was cold, and then I fell asleep again. I went right back into the same dream with this old lady coming into my room and calmly saying, "You have to go outside now." I kept telling her no, that it was too cold. I woke up again, and my fan was on. I figured I must have just thought I turned it off, or the button got stuck. So I got up, turned the fan off again, and went back to sleep. This time, I had the same exact dream, except she was much older looking in this one and was really agitated. She was yelling, "Go outside! You must go outside!" I got up in the dream and followed her to the hallway. When I got to the hallway, she wasn't there, and then I woke up, and I was actually standing in the hallway. I have never, ever walked around in my sleep before or after this. Also, my fan was on when I went back to my room. At this point, I was freaked out, so I got something to eat and watched TV for a couple of hours. I went back to bed around 5 or 6, and the dream didn't come back. The messed up part is, a couple of days later, I saw that there were police cars in the open space, and when I asked my mom what happened, she said they had found an older woman who was reported missing a few days before. She must have had a heart attack or a stroke or something on the trail by my house, and they had found the body. Let me start this story by saying this happened almost 3 years ago, when I was still pregnant with my first child, since I had just gotten married, and my mother's house had no space for another 2 members. I mostly stayed at home, with the occasional trips to the national park, or casual strolls around the neighborhood. My husband stayed home until 6 p.m., and then would be off to work. It wasn't the ideal post-marriage scenario I had in my dreams, but it did the job. I can't quite remember if it was late or not. I was home alone, watching TV. My husband was at work, and my sister was at the supermarket. It was all quiet, until I noticed our water dispenser's bottle was almost empty, so I called the delivery service. I went back to watching TV, and after a few minutes, I heard the doorbell ring. I was relieved, since I was dying of thirst at that point, so I made my way to the front door, and noticed 2 things that raised some huge red flags for me. First, I could hear what clearly was a car engine, and I knew water bottles were delivered in a motorcycle with a small cart attached to its back. Second, I could hear someone on the phone saying something along the lines of, "We're here," or something. Now, my sister's house was by no means in a dangerous part of town, but it wasn't exactly the most peaceful neighborhood either. Burglaries were not really unheard of, and there had even been some murders, although many were the result of heated discussions between drug addicts. Back to the story. I thought I was maybe overthinking the whole situation. Maybe it was some of my friends coming to visit me? I quickly scratched this theory when I asked, "Who is it?" And a raspy voice said, "Water guy." Not taking any chances, I slowly made my way back out the living room and slowly closed the door. They didn't ring the doorbell, nor called me, but I still could hear the car engine and their shadows from below the door. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard the car doors opening and closing multiple times, which could mean there was more than one guy, and the car driving off. I was still freaked out, but relieved that they were gone, whatever their intentions were. Not long after this, the water delivery guy arrived, and I asked if he had sent someone earlier, which he declined. My heart sank. I stood there while he delivered the water bottles, trying to find an explanation. Thankfully, nothing else happened. But some weeks later, I saw on the local newspaper that a group of criminals was being arrested for attempted break-ins. Apparently, Their MO was passing off as sanitary maintenance workers or other random service, and then forcefully entering the house after the owner opened the door. What scares me the most, however, was the fact that they knew I had asked for water delivery. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe they were spying on me as I made the call, which isn't unlikely, since I talk pretty loudly on the phone. Either way, I'm glad I picked up the red flags and went back to the living room. My siblings and I had an encounter with the paranormal through a Ouija board last year. My 3 older sisters, Sam, Karen, and Sarah, had come over that day to help me unpack in my new apartment, where, in a box, my grandmother had given me a glow-in-the-dark Ouija board. The girls were completely fascinated with the whole paranormal aspect, so they had invited my older brother to come around and play with us. We played for about an hour before I had decided to give up. We weren't getting anywhere, so what was the point? As I readied myself to move my hands away, the planchette started to go crazy, moving around in circles erratically. "Whoa!" my 4 siblings cried in unison. I sat still, completely in shock and scared. I used to be a skeptic until I realized something. It wasn't possible for all 5 of us to move the planchette in the same direction. Then, when it started to answer our questions, spelling out in full sentences, I realized this was truly happening. I simply asked in a meek voice, "Who are you?" "Zozo," it replied. Nathan, our brother, almost cried from shock. He explained that he'd heard of Zozo and that he was apparently showing up all over the world. He was a demon. I told everyone we had to say goodbye, trusting my brother as he was almost never wrong. My sisters refused and started asking questions, like if anyone we knew was going to die. The board spelt out, Aurora. We had no idea who Aurora was, so they didn't panic and started asking how this Aurora would die. "Inside," Zozo spelt out. Inside what? The board started moving erratically then, spelling out my name over and over again. I finally convinced my sisters and brother to say goodbye. About 4 months later, I found out I was pregnant. I had forgotten all about my experience with Zozo. Finally, I had found happiness with my husband and my unborn child. Just as I went into labor, my midwife explained that my daughter, who I was going to call Aurora, didn't make it. She was born stillborn. My precious little girl. I advise you to stay away from the Ouija board. I know that the mystery and disbelief can draw you in, but it isn't worth it. I paid for it in the worst possible way. So please, heed my warning. When my mother was young, she went out on a blind date. Her date took her to a restaurant, and although he was nice enough, she just wasn't into him. Halfway through the meal, she was so bored that she was already thinking of excuses so that she could leave early. The waiter could tell she was bored, and kept smiling and winking at her. While my mom's date was in the restroom, the waiter approached her and started asking her if she was okay. She explained that she was on a blind date, but she wasn't having much fun. It turned out that the waiter was just about to get off work. He offered to give my mother a ride home if she waited another 10 minutes. She considered it and was tempted to say yes. But just then, her date came back from the restroom. She shook her head, smiled at the waiter, and told him, "No thanks." My mom and her date finished their meals, and he drove her home. The next night, my mom happened to be watching the evening news. There was a news flash saying that a woman had been found murdered behind a restaurant the night before. She realized it was the same restaurant she had been at with her date. Then, they said that the police had already caught the killer. A picture flashed up on the screen. It was the waiter. About 3 years ago, I was driving to my dad's house from across state in Pennsylvania. He lived far out in the country, down a desolate paved road that crossed with an old dirt road, as well as some unused railroad tracks. The entire area was surrounded by deep woods and unused farming fields. There were a couple of dilapidated old houses, an old well, and a few old cemeteries nearby. I arrived at those crossroads I mentioned earlier after being on the road for about 4 hours. It was around 1 or 2 a.m. by this point, and I decided to pull over and relieve myself. I stopped my truck about 60 feet from said crossroad, close to a small farm shed with some old equipment in it. There was a single light bulb on the side of the shed, providing the only source of light in the nearby pitch-black darkness of the night. On the opposite side of the road from the shed was a steep drop-off into a ditch, on the other side of which were some dense woods. As I was relieving myself in the dark by the shed, I was suddenly overwhelmed by a massive feeling of dread, like someone had just punched me directly in the gut. I had been around these woods all my life, and used to walk around the area at night as a teenager, and I assure you that I had never felt so scared as I did at that exact moment. I quickly finished up, and goaded by my sudden sense of panic, ran back to my truck, got in, and locked the doors. I flicked the headlights on and cranked the engine so badly that you could hear the gears grinding. But all I cared about was getting out of there. As soon as I began to turn back onto the road from the shoulder, my headlights shone over the ditch and picked something up on the other side of the road, about a foot from the asphalt. My stomach immediately sank again. There was something crawling out of the ditch on all fours. It was hunkered down like an animal, but its body looked almost human, albeit a human that was attempting to mimic a stalking animal. It didn't look hairy, but it was a uniform color, almost dun yellow, not yellow like a cougar or lion, but a sickly yellow that reminded me of jaundiced skin. Its head was shaped like an oval, but had no hair or ears that I could see. The mouth was very, very wide, and looked like a thin, straight line that extended all the way across the creature's face. It was very, very slightly upturned at the edges, like a slight smile. The eyes were very small and beady, just like 2 black pinpoints. It had no nose or any facial features aside from the mouth and eyes. Since I was around 7 feet from it, I'm certain it wasn't just a person wearing a mask. Even the body sort of seemed wrong, but I can't pinpoint why. I couldn't see feet or hands, since there was about a foot of grass at the edge of the road. Whatever it was, I'd say it was about the size of a 12-year-old. As soon as my lights hit it, I could tell by its movements that it had been in the process of slowly creeping up the ditch to the road, and when my lights hit it, It sort of retracted slightly, like it was surprised that it had been discovered. I didn't stick around long enough to see what was going to go down next. I floored the gas and flew all the way to my dad's house, and stayed up the entire night freaked out. The part of this experience that still utterly scares me to this day is that whatever I saw was definitely stalking up that ditch to get me when I had my back turned to it. Otherwise, I can't possibly explain what had triggered those emotions when I stood there in the darkness with my guard completely down. The only thing that came close to that sudden realization of grave danger was when I was nearly struck by a speeding car on a city street many years ago. I don't know what could have happened if I lingered around for a few minutes longer, but I'd rather not think about it. Me and my friends Selena and Martha, Selena's sister Jasmine, and our common friend Emma. We are 5 in a group. One night at 7:30 p.m., we all decided to have a party at my house. My parents had gone out for an important meeting and would not return until the next day. All of us had decided to have fun. Martha had brought a Ouija board along with her. I asked her, "Why have you brought this with you?" To which she replied, "We must include them in our party as well." We partied hard, and then at 12 a.m., we decided to play with the Ouija board. We placed the board on a table and lighted some candles. Selena started the session. "Is anyone there who would like to communicate with us?" Selena asked. There was no reply. Selena spoke again. "Don't hesitate to talk." Again, there was no reply. We got bored after asking 21 times and decided to watch TV instead. As the girls had to stay in my house for the night, they went to change their clothes. When it was finally Martha's turn to change, she went to the washroom. Suddenly, we heard Martha scream, and we rushed to see what had happened. Martha was crying, and she said, "I just now saw myself walking across the washroom." At first, we didn't understand what she meant, and we thought that she was trying to scare us. But then, she showed us a scratch mark on her arm, which was not possible for her to make. We then thought to ask the Ouija board again. This time, I decided to ask the questions. "If anybody is here, please tell us. Is anybody there?" Strangely, this time the board decided to answer back. "Yes." "Who are you?" The board pointed to the letter D. "D who?" The board slowly spelt out the word, "Death." "What do you want from us?" "Blood. Your flesh as well," the board answered. And this was enough for us. We all left everything and ran towards the door, but the door did not open, and we realized that we had been locked in my own house. Some more supernatural things started happening. The lights were flickering, and things were being thrown here and there. We somehow managed to hide in one of the rooms, but to no avail. Martha got very angry, and she asked with a loud scream, "Why don't you leave us alone?" To which the Ouija replied, "Your screams make me powerful." Selena, in frustration, burned the Ouija board with a gas cylinder. The moment the Ouija board was burned, the front door opened with a loud noise, and without wasting any time, we ran out of the house. But the thing that happened after that is the most horrible part of the story. We all got out, but when Martha was about to step out the door slammed shut. For a second, everything was dead silent, but after that, we heard her screams from the inside. We banged on the door and called out her name. After some time, our neighbors came and we managed to break down the door. We found Martha lying unconscious on the floor. We took her to a hospital. After that day, Martha never spoke a word again. Later, we found that the spirit whom we had called through the Ouija board was David, who was Selena's half-brother. He died due to an accident. David was never good when he was alive, or dead. Martha was admitted to an insane asylum, and even today we don't know what exactly happened on that night. But whenever I look into her eyes, I get shivers all around my body, and I feel something horrible had happened. My family and I ended up moving from that house. Looking back, I have to ask myself the question, why did we do that? Because all of our lives have changed. I still feel a bad presence around me. We have lived in a haunted house for over 25 years. Maybe living with ghosts for that long opens parts of your mind to experiences that would normally be closed off. Just a thought. My wife and I were coming home late from dinner and drinks at a friend's house. We were in the country outside of Union, Missouri. On the south side of Union, there was an antique bridge that was scary to cross because it was so narrow and had a sharp turn at one end. After the bridge, the road went through a huge field that at the time was under cultivation. Well, I had to go to the bathroom in the worst way because of all the beer I drank. My wife said, "Let me get down to that field. There was an old shed right in the middle, and you can squat down by that shed." She stopped the car right in the road because it was late and so very dark. I got out and started to walk towards the shed, which was only a couple of feet off the road. Suddenly, I saw something, and it didn't register right away. It took me a couple of seconds to realize what it was. It was two eyes. Two big, really red, glowing eyes. They were looking right at me. I turned to see my wife looking over her shoulder at it too. It's kind of funny now, but neither one of us said a word. I turned and jumped back in the car, and we took off. Later, my wife asked me what kind of animal I thought it was. I'm an old country boy, and I've never seen eyes shine like that before. Those eyes were big, high, and so very red. The bridge has since been replaced with a new one, but the old shed is still there. Believe it or not, I still speed up when I go by it, because I'm still creeped out by what I saw all those years before. My boyfriend lives in a Civil War-era plantation home on a huge farm. The place has a weird vibe to it. None of the animals will come upstairs. If you bring them up, they will start shaking and dart back downstairs. My boyfriend won't even go in one of the bedrooms. Slave shackles are still hanging up in the basement. The place has apparently been pretty dormant as far as paranormal activity goes for the past year. I've had a couple odd experiences. My boyfriend says that it always gets more active around the holidays, though. In November, right before Thanksgiving, I was staying the night with him. I was about to fall asleep, and I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was the pack of coyotes that roam around the back of the farm, but I heard it again a few seconds after the first time, and it was definitely not a coyote. I immediately woke up and was aware of my surroundings, and I heard it again. It was a woman outside, calling for a man named John. She sounded so panicked and distressed. I heard her call a few more times, and I could hear the voice moving around the yard. I was creeped out, but I cuddled up to my boyfriend and went back to sleep. When I told him about it in the morning, he said, "That's a new one." Fast forward to exactly a month from my experience. I wake up, and the first thing out of my boyfriend's mouth is, "Remember a couple weeks ago, you heard a woman outside calling for someone? What name was it?" "John," I said. "I heard it last night," he replied. I set a reminder on my phone for the next month, but nothing happened. Really eerie. I've been trying to find out the history of the house to find out if a John ever lived there.